I'm Dominique Hoffman. I am the host of the Philos Project Podcast, and today I'm going to be bringing you guys news out of Iran and reacting to the government's public proposal for hijab removal treatment clinics. This was proposed by the Office for the Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Vice, which is headquartered out of the government's Department for Women and Family. These new clinics are going to offer scientific and psychiatric treatments for women who remove or refuse to wear their hijab. This is just another repressive proposal by the regime to crack down on the protest for the mandatory hijab laws. Now, I want to remind the audience what women in Iran prior to the regime. So before the 1979 revolution, women in Iran wore clothes that looked like women would wear in the West, in the United States, in Europe, obviously Persian inspired, but not too dissimilar. We see this beautiful woman here wearing her hair down. It's uncovered. She's wearing a dress that's actually quite high. You can see her upper thigh, her arms. And then in this next image, you're going to see university students who look similar to how university students in America or Europe would have looked in the 1970s. They're wearing t-shirts and jeans. Now that all changed in 1979 after the revolution with the new Islamic Republic. Khomeini, the supreme leader, came out saying in 1979 that women should dress in accordance with Islamic dress code. And that sparked protest even back in 1979 surrounding these mandatory dress codes, which included the mandatory hijab laws. In 1980, it became mandatory for women working in the government or the public sector to wear hijab. So in offices, it was mandatory. And then in 1983, it became mandatory for all Iranian women to wear their hijab. And there was penalties and fines for refusal to wear it, including up to 2 years in prison. Now, there was a watershed moment in 2022 following the death of Masha Amini, a 22-year-old Iranian Kurdish young woman who was killed in custody for not wearing her hijab correctly. She was arrested by the morality police, and her brutal death sparked protest for the mandatory hijab laws in Iran and the treatment of women under the regime. And in response to this, the regime doubled down on these laws and enforced stricter laws to not only enforce, but to punish those who dissented from complying with the mandatory dress code in Iran. In 2022, they drafted 71 articles that strengthen not only the control over how women dress in Iran, but also over businesses or institutions that fail to enforce the compulsory hijab laws with either fines and or closures. And the government has cracked down on protesters. Now, this isn't the first time even that we've seen the use of psychiatric institutions by the Iranian regime. Back in 2022, after Amini's death, Iran officials and the morality police arrested student protesters who also removed their hijabs in solidarity or in protest, or who had cut off their hair. They were arrested and then taken to psychiatric institutions. So we saw the regime using these psychiatric institutions even back in 2022. So this public proposal that came out this week is not necessarily a new practice for the regime, yet it seems that they're trying to institutionalize it and formalize it. Also, back in October, news that two journalists who broke the news of Amini's death were sentenced to 5 years in prison. So we've seen the continuation of that story up until present day. The Iranian judiciary sentenced them, I believe, just this past, back in July, it appears, to 5 years in prison for just breaking the story of Amini's death, which is wild for us here in the West to comprehend. And just this month, news broke of a young female protester on a campus, a university campus in Tehran. We don't know her identity, but you can see here in this image, she is just wearing her undergarment. So she's wearing a bra and underwear. She's wearing her hair uncovered, and she is walking around in an intersection in a square next to a busy road. This young lady was seen being arrested by the morality police. You can see here, this is a better photo of her. But she was arrested and she is yet to be seen. It's reported that she was taken to one of these psychiatric institutions or clinics or facilities, but we have yet to confirm if she's even alive. Amnesty International said they have found evidence that the Iranian regime uses electric shocks, torture, beatings, and chemical substances on protesters and political prisoners taken to these state-run psychiatric institutions. So, of course, these are not legitimate forms of medical care being given. This is hyperbole for torture, imprisonment, and I'm sure unspeakable things that we can't even fathom being done to these young women. Now, why is this important? It's important for a number of reasons. One, to remember that the harsh treatment of women in Iran has continued since long before 2022, but it was a salient issue in 2022. And then on October 7th, the world shifted their attention to the war in Israel and in Gaza against Hamas. But it's important to remember that the Iranian women continue to be punished both through collective reprisals, torture, imprisonment, and the world has been largely silent. We've seen the UN outspokenly condemn Israel and their quote unquote genocide in Gaza, and they've been relatively silent when it comes to Iran's treatment of their own people. Now, back in 2022, the UN did remove Iran from the Commission on the Status of Women, but that's not enough. They've been silent. And when they have condemned Iran, even for issues other than their treatment of women, such as their attack against Israel, the condemnation has been silent and has largely gone unnoticed. But imagine what regime change could happen if there was enough external pressure against the Iranian regime, and if the UN shifted their illegitimate condemnation of Israel and their quote-unquote genocide and the misappropriation of the term genocide towards the Iranian regime and their mistreatment of their own people. We could see change and relief brought to these women who have lived under unspeakable repression that those of us in the West will never understand.